my dream to be an artist, I became more known for destroying my art than I ever did for creating it, which is ironic. I call this my masterpiece. Nothing I created has ever equaled the experience of letting it all go and trusting so completely.
The nonprofit TAT Foundation was created in 1973 to bring spiritual seekers and finders together. We publish books, videos, and a free online newsletter. We maintain a website of spiritual resources and hold 4 spiritual retreat weekends each year. Our goal is to offer practical guidance for following a spiritual path and living a spiritual life. For more information, go to tatfoundation.org. That's tatfoundation.org.
Oh, thank you very much. And thanks to all of you at TAT for inviting me. You know, I have a bit of a strange story that I hope translates. I think, and you know, I would like to speak a little about embodied prayer is what I call it. And so I will tell a little of the story for those of you who haven't had time to look at the website or know or read my books or any of that. So I was a very driven artist in New York. I had my beautiful loft overlooking the Hudson River, and I was extremely driven, I would say pathologically driven. And in 1979, there was a documentary film by a well-known filmmaker being made about my life. Things were moving forward. I had an enormous body of work I had produced. And as I often say, I think I was trying to paint my way to heaven and realized that you can't get there from here. You know, will, intelligence, and good intentions have their limits. And I just came up against those limits and felt with all I have achieved, and the world says, what a good boy are you? You've done all this. But there was an emptiness stirring that could only be remedied by some kind of a radical leap. In 1979, at the height of all of this, I destroyed all my art and I gave everything I owned away. And I lived that way for the next 15 years. So prayer became embodied at that point because I never asked anyone for anything. I fasted when I didn't have food. I had fasted once a week anyway. I found it helped my inspiration. And I had done that for 20 years. And by 79, fasting became a reality where it was no longer an option, which was at times enormously difficult. And so on the strength of that, I lived that way, even to the point of in my loft, that the building was sold. It was full of artists, beautiful building full of artists. And at one point, a new owner came and he wanted to see the space, my space, which really was the most beautiful. And he said I was going to have to leave. And here I already was emptied out of everything. I gave everything I owned away. This was probably several months later. And I said, how soon do you want me to go? And he said, as soon as possible. And I walked out the door, right out the door at that moment, because that's how I lived my life. It was like, okay, what is this very moment right now calling for? And how do I respond to it? I no longer had any backup, anything but that trust in that moment. And that was the beginning, you might say, of fiercely embodied prayer, because I lived that way for the next 15 years, hardly touching money. I never spent the night on the street. And so I say all this because I was going from, you know, an illusion about what I thought I was doing that, you know, the world approved of. The art scene in the 70s, you know, an artist could do no wrong. They became the social false gods of pop culture. And it's like no one wanted to be the one responsible for cutting off Vincent van Gogh's ear. And so there was this oversight where artists could do no wrong. And so it was really a radical leap, even for me, because art had become a false god. And so so living this way was enormously difficult. I often described it early on at that time as learning to dance. You take these steps, you have to learn the steps, and it feels incredibly awkward. You don't know what you're doing. And then when you finally have learned the steps, the music comes on and it becomes a dance. And I have to say, this far down the road, it is a dance that has been pretty much completely inhabited. And it's like I moved to Whidbey Island in 1988, and everything, it was like a return to the world coming to the island. I arrived here with a backpack. That was all I had, and lived in every possible situation, always just giving, never asking for anything. I mean, that's how life went for those years. Coming to Whidbey was this incredible return to the world. I became part of the Whidbey Institute. I was brought here to help at a festival they were having to help adults working with art. And my good friend, Deborah Koff Chapin, a fellow artist on the island, is the one who arranged for me to be here and do that. And I connected with people, and all of a sudden, my strange life, which I believe me was very strange back in New York, to be living the life I lived, people understood it, and they, for the first time, I was accepted in a way that I had not been before. Of course, there were always a handful of deeply connected people in my life who got it. But it was strange to me, and I couldn't expect others to think otherwise. But coming here, it was the return to the world in a way that I wasn't even sure I could stay here, because I had no money. I arrived with no money. These nuns, these Catholic nuns who also had a gallery with a Jewish artist at Thorpe Intermedia Gallery, which was this amazing gallery, got New York Times coverage for their shows. And it was the most unlikely combination of people who began the gallery, a Jewish artist, David Weinrib, and a wonderful Catholic nun, Sister Adele Myers, started this enormous gallery in the basement of Thorpe Intermedia Center, which is a convent. And I helped with a show, and they did this whole thing. I created a whole show out of nothing because I was asked to do it. And it all went back to nothing when it was done because I had nothing. And the nuns gave me a gift, a little fish purse, like a little Jesus purse. And it was full of money. And that's how I ended up coming to Whidbey Island. But moving to the island was such a beautiful return. Not at first, because I was not sure, but eventually I was asked to write the Parabola magazine had made a film about my life in the Hands of Alchemy, which you can see on our website for free. And then I was asked to write a book. A publisher approached, having seen the film, asked me to write a book. And now I have a new book. But so coming here and the return to the world was the ultimate gift. I much more prefer being in the world, in the music, in the dance, than learning those steps of the dance, because there was such emptiness surrounding my life, no security in any way. And it wasn't something I was used to. I was very driven. I could do anything. But the most difficult learning experience for me, and the deep listening, which is the prayerful life, the embodied prayer, I could not afford to do otherwise. And all I can say this far down the road, I could not have lived this long, strange journey if there were not unseen hands helping me. I believe the gods meet us halfway. And I knew that I had to go for broke. The reality as I knew it was not enough. Even with all of my accomplishment, I felt like a failure. I felt this incredible emptiness. I felt like my drive was more, I was running from something. I was running from what I did not know. And I think the mystery, which was revealed slowly in the process after letting go, was the ultimate gift. And at this point, I'm back in the world. I got married at the age of 54. I'm living in a beautiful house in the country with my beautiful wife. And, this place and this way of being now, although it all looks very normal, the template that was struck in that hard-earned territory of living that embodied prayer is it's so ingrained and so second nature. I think prayer, it's like we are often in the, prayer for many of us is mostly a response to fear. It's a response to, those conditions that we would rather avoid. But I think embodied prayer, it's an ongoing conversation that is alive and well. And, like I have people come here all the time and some very troubled. And sometimes right in the moment, here's this enormously difficult situation. And somebody's, all I can feel is suffering in certain situations. And right in place, I'm asking, I'm open to what needs to come through, which means it's like there's a vulnerability necessary for this kind of, ultimate embodied prayer, where it's like, it's all one big question rather than one big answer. The answers that come because you are so vulnerable and in need of it. And that's what I mean by you got to let the gods know you mean business, because that's the place where I feel the ultimate response is. It's also the place of ultimate discomfort. In alchemy, there are dueling opposites, and the third body that emerges, the unseen, is grace, and it comes out of that tension. And most of us, would rather avoid that kind of tension. We want our comfort. And, I think when I often say I look out of two eyes. One eye is the, oh, hell eye. I don't want to go there. The other eye is, this is really hard and scary, but this is where it's at. This is where that magic happens. This is it. So I think at this stage in my life, that's the place. It has been so completely incorporated that it is second nature. And it's like a habit, it's nothing special by no one new. It's more like most of us are in the habit of responding to fear and pursuing comfort in one way or another, like Ramakrishna says, sex or gold. And, in one form or another. But the freedom that can come with embodied prayer is not completely free either. I mean, I love what Yogananda says. He says, a slave you must be. You're either a slave to the world or you're a slave to God. So there's a kind of attention that is required, I think, of all of us, however much we can give ourselves to it, where it's like prayer is a constant open asking, not for any, I mean, it can even be for something to help someone, in that kind of way, but it's mostly like, there's this hovering possibility that is alive and well and right in front of you, and you don't know how to get to it, and you don't know. And there's something about the vulnerability of moving forward anyway and staying in that discomfort where I think the magic happens, the miracle happens. So being an artist, I gave up art. I started doing it again. I have another enormous body of art, which again, you can see on our website. It's on handsofalchemy.com. And even art now, I do it, I feel, because it no longer matters. It's no longer a false god. I have I do it. It's a part of everything else now. And so much of that creation is a similar, it's a similar trajectory of embodied prayer, because I go into a thing and I have no idea what I'm doing. And when you hook into it, because things fall into place, someone will arrive and give me something, but it's it takes a life of its own. And there is mystery surrounding this kind of creation that is larger than intent. I love what Joseph Campbell says. He says there are three kinds of art, and this doesn't just go for art, but I just happen to be an artist, but Joseph Campbell says there are three kinds of art. The lowest form he calls pornography, which is art to elicit desire, whether it's advertising or sexual or whatever. The next level he calls propaganda, which is art with an agenda. Like, I'm going to do something good. I'm going to paint for Jesus or paint for Buddha or paint for somebody, and it's going to be good and great because I'm doing it for God. And that he calls propaganda. And the third kind, he says, simply leaves one in awe. And I think when we are awed by our own creation, whatever it is, raising a child, making a pot of soup, being an artist, being a business person, it doesn't matter. When we are awed by the mystery of what unfolds in our lives, that is as good as it gets. So hopefully there are some questions. I kind of do better. I'm not a professor or just a strange artist.
I have a few for you, Jerry, and I think some people in the audience will submit theirs as well. I wonder if you can talk about, in the time leading up to when the decision came to destroy all your artwork and give away all your possessions. Can you talk about maybe what the conflict was and how it was resolved in a way where you trusted enough to do something so radical like that?
Yeah.
What was the inner conflict?
Well, first off, being an artist in the studio, it's like a laboratory. You face the void all the time. You have a blank canvas. You don't know what you're doing, and then something happens, and so you have a vague inkling of what it means to trust unknowing, the emptiness, the blank canvas. I think so. With that in mind, realizing I was playing it so safe with this studio life and with the attention I was getting and the self-importance I was lost in, it felt, that had its own momentum. And so having the sense of how reality unfolds in the most amazing way possible, I knew I wasn't doing it with my life. So I felt, and I think this was really, I call this my masterpiece. Nothing I created has ever equaled the experience of letting it all go and trusting so completely. And so it was the discomfort. And then there's a story I tell in my first book. My friend Deborah, who I shared a loft with, came to me one day, and I was painting. I was just, driven like a maniac. I was painting and I had my paint clothes on, full of, dirty paint clothes, basically. And Deborah came and says, "Oh, I'm going to New York. I'm going into the city to see Hilleta Charlton. And, she said she's really being considered a saint, and she's doing these sessions at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And would you like to come?" And, I was pretty spontaneous and I trusted Deborah's sense of things. So I said, sure, right on the spot. I left with her with my dirty paint clothes. So I'm speaking to how the whispers along the way guided that. I was already feeling uncomfortable. And then this event happened where I went, and there were several hundred people, and Hilda, who looked and talked like, I thought in my judgment, like a witch, she was really an intense person. And she's up there, theatrical. She was a dancer. And she proceeds to tell a story about when she was a famous dancer. And she said, and then my big moment came where I was going to Hollywood. I had these Hollywood producers wanted to put me in a movie, and I was going to dance for them, and I was so excited. And so all these stony-faced, mostly men, were sitting there looking at her, and she was very self-conscious. And she said, I go to do, and she was making fun of herself, saying, dance. I was going to dance for them. And she takes 3 steps back and falls into a fish pond. And so, and she was making fun, and she demonstrated how walking across the stage, how she was dragging wet chiffon gown that she was wearing. So after her story, and then she says, but now I dance for God. And what she was doing, I mean, she went to an ashram, she became who she was. There are many books written about her. And so at one point, I really felt she was focusing on me, and I was way in the back. I mean, I had never been here to that event before. And she focuses on me and walks towards me, and she said, and first she looks around and she says, somebody in the audience, he's very dirty, but something is going to break through for him. And that's all she said. And then she looks around the audience and she bites a piece of candy, sort of Hindu guru style, and throws the other half to me, which lands on the floor in front of me. And she looks at me fiercely and says, eat it. And I did. And so all I knew is something really powerful happened there. She was talking about, in a sense, letting go of her career as a dancer. And I was so uncomfortable, and I so admired her courage by, the story she told and how she radically changed her life. And when I was leaving the cathedral, I looked walking out on the side of the wall, there was a canvas stretcher, and the painting had been cut off and the ragged edges of the canvas was still there. And I just got this hit that the work's got to go. The art is done. I'm finished with this. I could not, like I used to say, if I could have painted my way to heaven, I would have done it, because I tried hard enough and I did not succeed. And so there were many whispers along the way like that. It wasn't out of the blue, but there was also a moment in the middle of the night. I was in this loft full of artists. I was the only one who lived there. I was alone in the middle of the night, feeling this incredible discomfort, this incredible struggle. Like, where do I go from here? I can't do anymore. And it feels dead to me. I got the hit instantly to let it all go, destroy the work, give everything I owned away, and trust God, period. Whatever God is. And I'm not talking religion. I'm talking that mystery that's either going to carry my life in a way that is more alive or die, because that's the place I ultimately ended up. It just felt like I could not live this illusion any longer. And Soho was screaming the glories of the illusion at the time, and it was all a big lie. And I felt like the biggest liar of all, painting so radical, so extremely driven painter that I was. So all those things led to that moment. And the moment I knew what I had to do, it's funny, I hesitated, because here's my false God. It's like, you're talking about destroying your false God. Who are you separate from this identity? But it became too small of an identity. So that hesitation, it was the one thing in my life I wish I hadn't done. I wish I had not hesitated. But it was like, oh no, not that. That's the one thing I can't do. I was saying, I will always be an artist. I will always paint. But that hesitation felt so dead, like all you're doing is staying in the death. Instead, I just got up and did it. I started destroying the work. I cut them off the canvases, and it took up half the block out, half of Broadway in front of my loft. And I watched the garbage truck take them all away in the early hours of the morning. But so again, there were many stirrings, and most importantly, the discomfort of my entire life. I think and I was 29. I don't know if any of you are familiar with astrology, but they often talk about Saturn return, where everything is up for grabs. And if you think about it, it was like the age of Jesus, the age of Buddha. I think we all come up against it. Those people are the template for that experience in many ways. But I think we all come up against something about that age, which astrologers call Saturn return, where it's all up for grabs. And we can either go for life or we can recoil and become smaller. And all I know is that event for me was the most important thing I've ever done for my life. And even as an aside, my dream to be an artist, I became more known for destroying my art than I ever did for creating it, which is ironic. And what other? I'm sorry. Did you ask another question, or is that?
Well, I know that's a great answer. Thank you. I wanted to kind of change gears a little bit from that one. We had a question about this, and I'm a little bit curious because Richard Rose, the founder of the TAT Foundation, I think many people would say like a big approach of his to, I guess, the mystery of life is about, for him it was about self-definition, knowing what you really are. Would you say that by the end of your search, or there was an end of your search where you have a sense of what you are for real in that sense, if those words work for you?
Yeah. Yes, of course. Because most of what we do is respond to fear, to limitation, and the smarter we are, the more we finesse our lack of knowing, our lack of real sense of being. There's something that happened, and I'm hesitant to talk about it, but it speaks to the depths of this kind of unknowing. There was a moment, and I was giving everything I owned away after I destroyed my art. And I didn't even have a bed. I was sleeping on this little straw mat, and I was so unhappy and so uncomfortable. And I was just kind of like screaming out within in my silent meditation. God, I've given it all. What more can I do? And I feel like it was a moment where I felt like I could almost touch and taste what I wanted, but I couldn't get there because I felt like I wasn't good enough. I didn't do it good enough. What I gave still wasn't enough. And I felt like, what else can I do? I know I'm a failure. I know I can't do any more. And I'm still feeling this emptiness. And it was a moment, and I never wrote about this because it's such a strange story. But it was a moment where I literally could see, like a Tibetan tanka, with that which I desired was in the center, where I was so close, and I could see it, and I could taste it, and I could smell it, but I couldn't have it. And in the tankas, they have wrathful deities around the edges of that center whole place. And I felt the wrathful deities would not let me in. And it was a moment where, for whatever reason, and it certainly wasn't because I earned it or deserved it or achieved it, I felt it was a very feminine presence that let me in the door. And I can't say any more about what that door is. All I know is everything changed there. And I felt like I got away with murder, the murder of my identity. I don't know but I felt like I know I didn't deserve it, but something was given there at that point. And again, I know it to be a feminine presence. I love what Yogananda says. He talks about God the Father, God the Mother. He says, God the Father, you will never please. It's reason, it's logic, it's achievement, it's discipline, it's the things that we know we are supposed to do and can't, or be and can't. And God the Mother loves us no matter what. All I know is it was God the Mother that came through, and I felt God the Father got off my case.
Thank you. I have a question for you, and I think you know, a lot of people here in attendance today would consider themselves still seeking for some kind of answer like that. And I'm just something about your story is you there was an incredible amount of trust, and I think sort of the opposite of trust is, you know, it's a distrust, but distrust is about fear. And you were in some pretty what could be pretty dangerous situations in your book. You speak about a number of them. What
Yeah.
can you say to someone here who's dealing with fear, and how you dealt with fear, the fear of jumping without a net or the fear of being in a scary situation?
Yeah, I think we will always have fear. I love in the Castaneda books, he talks about his teacher, Don Juan. He says a warrior might be shaking in his boots, but he moves forward anyway. And I think that's about as good as it gets. It's not like you're going to eliminate fear. I mean, so it's the fear isn't going anywhere. It's the ability to stay with it. And I will also say, because I gave everything to the process and simply began to trust what was. And you cannot improve on what is. I'm not saying we should go into dangerous situations and set ourselves up, because you are going, you know, it's just insane to do something like that. But I don't know about other people's lives. All I know is if we can boil life down to what is, not what we want, not what could be, not what should be, you know, not what we would, that which is going to get us away from the fear, but what is right in front of us. You cannot improve on that, and you can fully trust whatever it is, even if it's a terrifying situation. You can still trust it. I mean, maybe I should tell a story from the book for those who don't know, which is probably what you're talking about, like with the raisins and the gang. Would you like me to do that? Well, I mean, an example of that, I wouldn't have set myself in a situation like this, but this, you know, after I had given everything up and I was fasting so much because I gave all my money away, and the rent was being paid by somebody who was renting half of my loft, so I was still able to be there for a while. But when I was still in my loft, I would go for, but all my art was gone. I was just meditating all the time. And I would go for walks at odd hours because I couldn't sleep because I wasn't eating. And I went for a walk at like about 3 a.m, you know, and I had to go down these 3 flights of stairs out onto Broadway, out on the street. And I would just walk, you know, fiercely walk as a way to just get all the energy moved out and moving. And I was coming to a gang who was on the corner by this YMCA sitting on the stoop, this gang of guys, and there were some girls sitting on the stoop. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I walk by and nod. And at one point, this one guy says, "Got a match?" And he has a cigarette in his mouth. And I said, "No, I'm sorry, I don't smoke." And I kept going, and I was way down the street. And I hear him say, "Hey, come back here." So it was one of those moments where I was scared. And I thought, I didn't ask for this. Here it is. This is what is. I turned around and I walked back, and he has a cigarette between his teeth and says, "What do you have?" And so at the time, I used to carry these little boxes of Superman raisins that someone had given to me, that I would give to the children in the neighborhood. You know, they all knew me, and they would come running when they saw me when I walked down the street, and I'd give them these little boxes of raisins. So that was all I had. So I set the raisins down in front of several of the guys and the girls sitting on the stoop, and I kept walking. And at one point I hear the raisins hit the street beside me, and way down the road, where if I suppose if I were more sensible, I would have kept going. But the leader once again says, "Hey, get back here, white boy." And I was like, well, you know, I wanted to keep going, but once again, it was a moment. And again, the clarity of not asking for this, of not setting it up. I walked back, the gang surrounded me. And the leader, like right in my face, what are you doing giving me these? Who do you think you are? And it was just very scary and violent. And so at that moment, it was almost like part of the embodied prayer idea. I went within myself and I just got in touch, because I grew up in a poor, mostly Black neighborhood where I knew the suffering of these young kids, and I had a love for them. You know, they were, you know, they were my family, and growing up as a young kid, and not literally, but that I knew their reality because it was part of my own. I got in touch with this sweet, innocent love for these young Black men, and I simply said, which was a deep feeling more than a saying, and I think this is where the prayer was answered. I said, I was just trying to be kind. And at that point, and it was so heartfelt and real, the women jumped up and they pushed the men away from me, and they said, you be on your way now. You leave them alone. They don't mean you no harm. And I walked away. But I think, like a moment like that, it's like, fear is all there is. You see the writing on the wall. I had someone visit me just a week before where a gang had beaten him up. He was kind of this arrogant little street kid who used to come and tell me his problems. And, anything can happen. And I don't think we can avoid that. But I also think we shouldn't set ourselves up for situations like that. But that's what was. And to me, that's where the miracles are. That's where the magic happens. That's where the prayers are answered when all else fails. And it was also, when I was, my first book was in 2002. So it's an old book at this point. The stories I told, because of that, sometimes the best way to share your heart is through story. They are the stories like that, where all is lost. There's no way you're going to survive this moment, and yet you do. And that's why I said earlier, with my strange life, I couldn't have faked it this long. There were just way too many things that didn't make sense. But the moment I was up against loss of, the ultimate loss, where it feels literally like life or death, something would come through. I never spent a night on the street. So at this point, I love my life. I love everything about it. And, I don't get what I want, but that kind of habit of living that prayer is so ingrained that I don't even know I'm doing it. In some way in my psyche, I suppose, I live this very abnormal conversation with the gods, when externally, we toured the country and we speaking, and I've got all my, paraphernalia and books and doing all that stuff. But in some other way, between God and me, that's my conversation, whatever that God is. And I'm not talking religion. I am talking, there is a larger mystery here that knows how to carry our lives much better than we do. And I don't see that there's any game better than that one to be giving our lives to.
Thank you. We have a question here. It's a bit of more of like a advice type of question. But the question is, what would you say to someone who distrusts feelings and sees his own thoughts as the thread to follow on his spiritual path or even just life?
Well, we all mistrust sometimes. Who doesn't have doubt? What would I say to them? I would say you're going to make mistakes. I think trust has to be larger than outcome. You're going to blow it. You're going to say stupid things, do stupid things. I think your intent is probably as good as it's going to get. It's okay to doubt, but if there's one aspect of reality that we should pay attention to the most, it's that which we fear, which is right in front of us. So I'm not saying, I think mistakes come with the territory. this far down the road, I feel like even when things, when they're, I won't go into my personal, but even with mistakes, there's a golden thread in there, if we, which is completely available as well. So I would say face your fear and know you're going to make mistakes, especially, for those of us who are newly on the spiritual path. I think your intent is as good as it's going to get, purify your heart, go for what you believe, try to be the best person, the most beautiful, create beauty. Beauty is a really good indication of what is healthy. And beauty isn't an idea. Beauty is a feeling that this is it. This sense of things is reality. And out of that sense of beauty, literal beauty is created. It doesn't happen the other way around. I mean, you can't fill your house with fashionable furniture and think you've created beauty when the intent or when the money you got to get it, you robbed the bank to get, or whatever else. Beauty is complete in its feeling, in its response to the mystery, and in your courage to live that beauty. That's where it all begins.
And you use a word that you use a lot is mystery, and in your book, The Inspired Heart, you write, be a living relationship to your own mystery. And can you talk about what that means? Because to me, mystery means you don't know. So how can you be a relationship? How can you be a relationship or have a relationship with that? Can you expand a little bit?
Yeah. Well, knowing that you don't know, and that you can't know, and that what you need will come when it does, you're always stalking that. There's paradox, that knowing unknowing. You know it's there. You don't know how to relate to it. You don't know what you need. All you know is there's this hovering sense of beauty that is waiting to emerge. It's like an Easter egg hunt. It's like you just go about your life, and you do physically what you need to do to find the golden egg. You move the bushes aside, you chop wood, carry wood, or you do whatever it takes. But what is that biblical, the proverbial, I say unto you, watch? You're always watching for what the miracle has in store, what the mystery has in store. So it's almost like, again, looking at it two eyes. One's the eye of the world, get your butt out of bed and do something beautiful. And the other eye is, no matter what you do, it's never good enough. No matter what you're looking for, you're not going to find. But what is completely that which will completely carry your life and keep you inspired and alive is always available, even in the darkest places. And very often, that's where it's at, in the darkest places. So what is the mystery? How do you do it? It's there. And, it's almost like suffering, suffering. We all suffer, and things get hard, and we forget. And there's something about suffering that once you know and you have established that relationship with that mystery, whatever. And again, I know it's very, very hard to define, but once it's established, you can't take suffering seriously anymore. I mean, I think it's, even the suffering of the body, even the loss of the body. I mean, who knows what happens when we die? But all I know is I found more life in walking into everything that looked like death than I did chasing life in a hedonistic way when I was younger, So the mystery is a sense and a commitment to the unknowing. But you also, why do we all have hope? You win a card game and you feel blessed. What is that sense of possibility in all things? It's like we know there's something there that can make us a winner, whatever that winner is. You win the prize, you win the relationship, you win the car in the game show. You feel blessed. Blessing is hovering in all of our lives all the time, and we all know it. However self-indulgent we might get, and even, and I think even to the extent of people who are suicidal, I mean, people would rather destroy their body than to let go into that which they know is there. It's almost like, I won't get too much into that, but the mystery is a sense of being that hovers in all of our lives. We all know it, whether we call it that or not. I think even the psychopath has a sense of the sacred. We all have a sense of it. However much we're willing to live it, however much money on the barrelhead we are willing to put into that process, is as much as and more we will get back. I don't know if I can answer the question any better than that.
No, thank you. I guess maybe you touched on this, and if we're just going over the same thing again, but what would you say to someone? What would you recommend to someone who wants to be, they want to be able to see that mystery better or hear it better? What would you recommend for them to kind of parse it out through all the other noise of life?
Yeah. Well, it has to be a priority. I mean, Ramakrishna says, someone came to Ramakrishna, I think it was Ramakrishna, and he kept bugging him, how do I find God? How do I find God? And Ramakrishna kind of got tired and annoyed with the guy. So he takes his head and dunks it in the water and holds it under, and he comes up gasping for air. He says, when you want God as much as you want air, you will find God. It's got to be a priority. If you want the world, you'll get the world, and it will leave you empty. Believe me, I tried that and it left me empty. When you want God, you will get God, whatever that God is. And again, it's not a religion. It is that mystery. It is that sense of the sacred. It is your birthright, and it's completely available to all of us. No one is special on that front. So it's a priority. Where is your energy going? Are you sitting around feeling sorry for yourself? Are you investing in work and everything else is suffering? What if the conversation in all things was to be fully present with your child, if you have a child, with your workplace, if you have a workplace? What if you were always seeking that mystery in all things, while you did a good job doing what you do? So you work in a shoe factory, you're making good shoes. While you're doing that, you might notice next to you, the person next to you is silently suffering, and you will be there for them. Therein lies the mystery. Therein lies the watching. It's a priority. What you can do is you can give it a priority, and you can live passionately for that thing.
Would you say, thank you. We have a question here. Do you still pray? If so, has the nature of your prayer changed in the way your impulse to make art has changed? If not, why don't you pray anymore?
Well, I don't know that I pray or I don't pray. I think, that's why the best word I could give it is embodied prayer. It's a watchfulness. It's an attention. It's always looking for the deeper level of things to unfold. Prayer. I love what Yogananda says about we shouldn't pray like a beggar. I think, we all get self-indulgent and do that sometimes, but I think I am prayer. I don't know how else to put it. And sometimes that being of prayer fails miserably because I get lost in different ways, just like everybody else. But I don't know how much more prayer I can be. And I mean be, I don't mean do. There are times, I built a tower, a meditation tower. There are times when I'm out in the yard chopping wood, carrying wood or whatever, and I just feel called to the tower. I will go and something will happen. Something will come through, an inspiration or I don't know, just a remembering. You remember the sense of sacred in life. And so prayer is an attention deeper than literally what's going on. And that's not to say you also have to please God the Father, which is what's going on. You got to do a good job. You got to let the guys know you mean business. You know, you've got to do your best. You've got to be the most loving person you can be. But you also know, like the Bhagavad Gita says, goodness is the final obstacle to God. So if you think you're going to get to heaven by being good, it's not going to work. Goodness is attention to what is, and allowing what is to come through in a way that touches the world in a way you never could have done, even with your best intentions. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't do your very best or try to be that kind of good person. But everything we do is limited in that capacity. Bottom line, there is a gift awaiting all of us, whether we get there or not. You know, I don't know what it takes to do that, because like I said, what happened for me, and I don't want to be too self-indulgent about this, I did not deserve. I did not earn. I didn't do enough. All that I sacrificed was not enough, but it was as much as I could do, and there was a gift that came with it. I love the term sacrifice. Transliterated, it means to make sacred. You know, and even art. So I gave up my false god art, and yet it all came back. And I have another enormous body of art, which this new book is about. And interestingly enough, I walked out of my loft that I love. That was this beautiful big space. And here I am on Whidbey Island, and this house that I'm living in, that was my wife's. It was an ex-woodworking shop, and the space that inhabits all of my art now is exactly to the foot, the same size as my loft. So I love that you put what you love on the altar. It is sanctified and returned. So I think, you know, the meaning of sacrifice, when you sacrifice the small for the sense of something larger, even what you love literally is sanctified and returned to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just sitting with that, what you just said. You put what you love on the altar and is sanctified in return. I guess a question I have, maybe another practical question. What state of mind maybe made you most receptive to listening or trusting, or were there specific feelings that were there, or a feeling when you were most able to, say, receive guidance, or however you want to phrase that?
Well, again, you know, we all have a sense of the sacred. I think for whatever reason, I always took it seriously. You know, sometimes, you know, even as a foolish young person, self-importantly serious, you know, I mean, I thought art was it. But, you know, whatever we do, if we do it with all our heart and soul, it's going to bring us to this place of metaphorical death. You know, it's like if we, you know, that's why I think we have to meet the God the Father as closely as we can, halfway, because we have to do our very, very best believing in what we do. And I believe art, for me, was God. It was no different. It was the one thing, you know, that I could do. And so behind that, I lost track of your question, sorry.
Well, the question had been about, was there a particular state of mind or a specific feeling that was there? Did you have to put yourself in that state of mind, or?
Well, again, being an artist, you learn, you can kind of get a feel for the template of creation because you face a blank canvas. And so you know the magic that can come out of that, the inspiration. You know, I mean, inspiration makes us come more alive. I love in A Course in Miracles, it talks about, you know, we all forget God, and remembering is it. You remember again, you are remembered. And so having a little, you know, this in the safety of the laboratory of the studio, having a sense of that rhythmic renewal, the sort of death, rebirth over and over again, you come to trust it. I came to trust it more and more, where to the point where I think the God's up the ante and says, okay, now do it with your whole life, which scared the hell out of me, which is what destroying the art was. Okay, I couldn't have done it if I didn't sense something greater would come out of it. I love what Yogananda said, something outrageous. I once read in one of his books, something like, this is pretty outrageous. I'm surprised he didn't anger the church, but he said, I don't think Jesus would have walked on the cross if he didn't know he wasn't going to be saved. So it's a sense of the sacred. It's a sense that the gods are alive and well and willing to carry your life even into death. And who knows what happens in death? But if you can face the deaths in your life, death is no longer a boogeyman. If you no longer fear death, but even trust that there's inspiration in even the final demise of the body, what's left to be afraid of?
There's we have just a couple more minutes. I'd love to keep talking, but we have to wrap up in a few. I wanted to get to one question here. We have a question. Are you still seeking to be what is, quote, more deeply even now? Are you, quote, done? Or is that only when the body drops?
Done. I'm not seeking anything. I'm 72 years old. I've been following the kind of mythos of my own journey, which seems to have a life of its own. And there are still aspects of it that I'm watchful for, but that's all very much completing the physical journey. I don't know, I don't feel like I have any more to give to the process of seeking, and I'm not seeking anything because I feel like I can't improve on what I was given. And it's not like I get what I want. It's not like I get it when I want it. All I know is there's a perfection that is best managed by not interfering with it, by not filling it with false hopes and longings and pursuits, even to the point of spirituality. You can get into the whole, I think I think to become at one with who we most are, what we can most be given, is as good as it gets. And I'm not talking about perfection, because I still make mistakes. I still do stupid things. I still get self-indulgent. I still get lost in what I think I want or would like, but the bottom line is I don't take any of that petty stuff of mind seriously anymore, because I can't. I just can't. I know what is greater, and I'm totally attached to that. Not that I own it. I can't put it in my pocket and take it to the bank, but there is nothing more than that I want.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry. We really appreciate you spending the time with us today and sharing all that with us.
Well, thank you. Thank
and
you.
Since we have a minute left, Jerry has 2 books. He has this one, The Inspired Heart, and a new book, which is called A Second Wind, which is actually a coffee table book. But it's kind of more than a coffee table book. If you want to give a little pitch for that, Jerry.
Well, it's some of the magic, because the first book is so much about my crazy story and life. And The second book, I have this, like I said, which is full, the book is full of my new art. It's also retrospective, the earlier art destroyed. But I focused on the art and the magical stories, the moments of salvation and creation of some of the art pieces, because that mystery is in all things and translates to what we love to do as well. It's not like we have to be some kind of slave to, that which we don't love. I love art. I love doing art. And so the book is full of stories connected to it. And some of them awed me. So, again, if we are awed by our own creation, so too will the world be. So I hope those stories do that for others, because they blow me out of the water when it happens. And again, they are the product of that conversation and embodied prayer of the moment.